Mercedes has reigned supreme in Formula 1's V6 turbo hybrid era so far. But while it's so often been plain sailing for F1's dominant force, there have been times where things have gone spectacularly wrong. Whether it's driver blunders, pit stop calamities, strategic disasters or reliability catastrophes, we've picked out the 10 race days when Mercedes capitulated. Some of our choices led to terrible results, while others simply ended up with Mercedes finishing down the order when it should have won. Make sure you subscribe to the race so you don't miss any of our Formula 1 videos. And to be told the second there's something new to watch, hit the notifications bell. 10. Imola 2021. The 31st lap of the 2021 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola will go down as one of the worst for Mercedes, with not just 2 but 3 of its drivers combining with disastrous consequences for the team's chances. First, Lewis Hamilton decided to lap Williams driver and Mercedes stablemate George Russell into Tosa while closing on race leader Max Verstappen. But he misjudged how wet it was offline and slid into the gravel. Hamilton spent over a minute in the gravel, eventually reversing out, having crunched his front wing while trying to escape forwards. He returned to the pits, losing a lap in the process. Meanwhile, Russell continued and, having started his 31st lap, closed on the other Mercedes of Valtteri Bottas on the start-finish straight. Using the DRS, he attempted to pass Bottas through the left-hand kink, with the Mercedes following the line that took him towards the right of the track. Russell ended up on the damp part of the circuit and, in correcting a little wheel spin, ended up on the grass, spinning and spearing into the side of Bottas's Mercedes. Both were out on the spot, and neither driver, or Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff for that matter, was happy. There was an upside to the collision, as the resulting safety car and red flag allowed Hamilton to get his lap back, setting the stage for his recovery to second. Although Mercedes still got a second place out of it, and Hamilton was already up against it in terms of winning before his off, 2 accidents in the space of 90 seconds involving 3 of its drivers was too calamitous to ignore. 9. Malaysia 2016. As he started the 41st lap of the 2016 Malaysian Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton seemed to be on his way to a vital victory in the World Championship fight. Then he slowed, with smoke, then fire, emerging from the rear of his Mercedes as a result of a big end bearing failure. It was a completely unexpected problem, coming just 618 kilometres into the engine's life. Hamilton's retirement handed a 1-2 to Red Bull, with Daniel Ricciardo leading home Max Verstappen, and ensured Mercedes didn't clinch the Constructors' Championship that day, despite Nico Rosberg's 3rd place. Most significantly, it allowed Rosberg to stretch his championship lead to 23 points with 5 races remaining, and it left Hamilton wondering if forces were against him, given the number of Mercedes engine problems he suffered that season. While it was just bad luck that led to these problems, the Malaysia failure was a vital swing in Rosberg's path to beating Hamilton to the title. 8. Austria 2019. Mercedes had won 8 out of 8 races in 2019 when it arrived at a searingly hot Red Bull Ring for the Austrian Grand Prix. There, the weather conditions condemned Bottas and Hamilton to very conservative drives to 3rd and 5th respectively. And why? It was all down to an error in inputting the figure the radiators could dissipate in terms of temperature per square centimetre when the car was being conceived, with a system of checks that should have picked up the mistake failing to do so. The resulting miscalculation was a radiator capacity that couldn't deal with the Austrian heatwave. Both Bottas and Hamilton were frustrated by how slowly they had to drive to keep the cooling within safe parameters in conditions that were around 6 degrees too hot for the Mercedes. 7. Canada 2014. After 6 consecutive wins, the first defeat suffered by Mercedes in the V6 turbo hybrid era came in the 2014 Canadian Grand Prix. Rosberg led from Hamilton for the first part of the race until Hamilton suffered an ERS failure at turn 10 on lap 36. Moments later, at turn 1 on the following lap, the same fate befell Rosberg. That left both cars without the MG UK, meaning no harvesting and no extra 161 brake horsepower. The pair kept going, with Hamilton jumping Rosberg in the pits to lead, only to lock up and run wide at the hairpin, dropping back to second. He continued to pressure Rosberg, but eventually retired with the rear brakes cooking, thanks to the ERS problem. Rosberg made it to the end, having managed the problem superbly, but couldn't hold on to the lead, with Daniel Ricciardo passing him with 3 laps remaining to take his first F1 victory. 6. Australia 2018. Hamilton and Mercedes looked to have the Australian Grand Prix well under control in 2018, leading the early stages from pole position and making their one and only pit stop at the end of lap 19. Ferrari opted to leave Sebastian Vettel out in the lead in the hope of a safety car. Hamilton, meanwhile, was 13 seconds behind at the end of his outlap and started to close on Vettel at a very sedate pace, despite the fresh tyre advantage. Then, Romain Grosjean's Haas stopped on track after a botched pit stop, and the safety car Ferrari had been hoping for was deployed. Mercedes wasn't concerned, as Hamilton was well within the 15 seconds that its race strategy systems said he needed to be to retake the lead. The trouble is, Vettel was able to stop and emerge still ahead. Despite Hamilton's best efforts, the Ferrari stayed in the lead and Hamilton ended up second. Hamilton had plenty of pace in hand and could have closed up on Vettel more before the safety car, but had been told he didn't need to. The question is, why? After the race, Mercedes discovered an error in an offline strategy tool to calculate the time that the gap to Vettel needed to be within. Mercedes thought Hamilton was comfortably within the 15-second window when, in fact, the real number should have been just under 13 seconds. Had the pit wall known that, Hamilton would have been told to push harder and won the race. Instead, the bug in its system gave first blood for 2018 to Ferrari. 5. Belgium 2014. Mercedes was set up for a 1-2 finish in the early stages of the 2014 Belgian Grand Prix, with Hamilton leading from Rosberg. But on the second lap, a collision between the pair proved costly. Rosberg closed on Hamilton up the Kemmel Straight and attempted to go around the outside in the first part of Les Combes. He ended up clipping Hamilton's left rear tyre with his front wing, suffering a little damage and giving his teammate a puncture. While Hamilton lost a huge amount of time returning to the pits and eventually retired his damaged car when it was clear he couldn't score points, Rosberg was able to stay out but ended up finishing second to Ricciardo. As well as costing victory, the collision caused a huge amount of acrimony between Rosberg and Hamilton, and most importantly to the team, cost it a surefire victory. 4. Austria 2018. It was a case of anything that could go wrong did go wrong in the 2018 Austrian Grand Prix, one of only 2 races to date in the V6 turbo hybrid era where Mercedes hasn't scored a single point. Things were looking very good, with Hamilton leading Bottas and Mercedes seemingly on course for an easy 1-2 finish at the Red Bull Ring at the start of the 14th lap. Then, a hydraulic leak in Bottas's power steering led to the whole hydraulic system shutting down, meaning he could no longer change gear. His race run, and knowing a safety car wouldn't help his teammates' cause, Bottas desperately tried to find a way to pull off the track without triggering one. He worked his way down a road on the edge of the gravel trap at turn 4, only to find no way to get outside the bounds of the circuit. The virtual safety car was deployed. Bizarrely, Mercedes dithered and did not call Hamilton in under the VSC amid uncertainty about what everyone else would do. But with the rest of the front-runners doing the logical thing and stopping, Hamilton was left out on his own, leading to an apology over the radio from Mercedes strategist James Vowles. As the VSC quickly ended, there was no chance to rectify the error, and despite his best efforts, Hamilton's pace was mediocre on used rubber. Inevitably, he was called in under green flag conditions and rejoined in 4th place. But now, tyre blistering problems set in and any chance of victory evaporated. Hamilton was passed by Sebastian Vettel's Ferrari and ultimately retired from 4th place with a loss of fuel pressure. Toto Wolff described it as the most painful day of my years with Mercedes. 3. SAKHIR 2020. After Hamilton tested positive for COVID-19, Williams driver George Russell was drafted in as a stand-in for the SAKHIR Grand Prix in Bahrain. After qualifying second, he took the lead from Bottas at the start and looked on his way to a famous victory, having retained the advantage during the pit stops. Then, his replacement at Williams, Jack Aitken, spun and glanced the wall, bringing out the safety car despite being able to recover to the pits. Mercedes correctly called in Russell and Bottas for fresh rubber, but that's where things started to go badly wrong. Mercedes accidentally fitted 2 of Bottas's fresh tyres to Russell's car and sent him out. This was a result of a problem with the radio system that led to half of the pit crew not hearing the instruction to complete a double-stack pit stop from the pit wall, instead hearing a communication from Russell. This led to Bottas having a slow stop, with the team eventually sending him out with the tyres unchanged to avoid a penalty, having realised the mistake. To fix the problem, Mercedes then called Russell in for another stop to put the right tyres on and avoid a penalty. That left Bottas and Russell in 4th and 5th respectively, but there was still a chance of victory. Russell dived past Bottas to run 4th, then climbed to 2nd. He was just over 2 seconds behind leader Sergio Perez when he picked up a puncher and was called in again. Bottas faded to 8th, with Russell recovering to 9th. 2. Germany 2019. Mercedes celebrated 125 years in motorsport at the German Grand Prix in 2019, with the Netflix cameras filming Drive to Survive focused on them that weekend, a special livery, and the team donning retro gear to add to the pageantry. Things started well, with Hamilton leading Bottas in a Mercedes 1-2 on lap 29 of the wet race. Then, Charles Leclerc crashed his Ferrari at the penultimate corner. With the safety car deployed, Hamilton slid off the track and damaged his front wing after hitting the wall just in front of Leclerc's car. He dug himself out of the gravel and pitted, with the wrong-footed Mercedes team taking 50 seconds to turn him around. The fact that several team members were wearing period flat caps just added to the absurdity of the scenes. To make matters worse, Hamilton also picked up a 5-second penalty for driving the wrong side of the bollard at pit entry, then later spun at turn 1 on his way to 9th place. Things were even worse for Bottas. While running second behind winner Max Verstappen, he also spun at turn 1 but couldn't keep it out of the wall, leaving Mercedes with very little to show for its celebration weekend. 1. Spain 2016. Given how difficult overtaking is at Barcelona, when Rosberg made a better start from second on the grid, slipstreamed Hamilton on the run to the first corner, then went around the outside of him to take the lead, he seemed well set for victory. But he had a problem. He was in the wrong engine mode. This was at a time when radio communications to drivers were limited, so he could not be warned that he'd failed to change the engine mode at the end of the formation lap. The launch map automatically kicked in for the start, but then returned to the lower power formation lap mode. Rosberg was therefore slow off turn 3. Hamilton saw the derate light flashing on the rear of the lead car and knew he had a chance. Rosberg reacted by hitting the overtake button for extra power, but Hamilton had momentum and went to the right. Rosberg also moved right to cover, with Hamilton having to take to the grass, spinning and collecting the other Mercedes. Both were buried in the gravel trap. Max Verstappen won on his Red Bull debut, and the fractious relationship between Hamilton and Rosberg reached its nadir. Let us know if you'd have chosen any different Mercedes disasters for this list in the comments below. And if you enjoyed what you've just watched, don't forget to like and subscribe.